My name is Janet Martin, and I've been working as a senior programmer at Tech Solutions for 25 years. Unlike many of my younger colleagues who worry about job security in the ever changing tech landscape, I've managed to stay relevant and valued. During my early career, I quickly established myself as someone reliable who could solve complex problems, which has served me well as the industry evolved around me. My life took an unexpected turn 12 years ago when my marriage fell apart. After the divorce, with no children to consider, I made the difficult decision to move back into my parents' home. My father, William, now 78, was showing early signs of dementia, and my mother, Martha, 76, was struggling with severe arthritis. They needed help, and I needed to rebuild my life. What I thought would be a temporary arrangement has stretched into over a decade of balancing my career with caregiving responsibilities. Janet, we were hoping you might continue staying with us, Mom said one evening as we sat around our dining table, her arthritic hands trembling as she reached for her water glass. Dad nodded beside her, his eyes momentarily focusing before that familiar fog seemed to settle over them again. What do you mean? I asked, setting down my fork. I've been here for years now. I'm not planning on going anywhere. The confusion in my voice was genuine. After all this time caring for them, did they think I was considering leaving? Dad cleared his throat, a habit that always preceded difficult conversations. Well, sweetheart, the truth is, we're having more trouble keeping up with all the bills these days. Your mother's medication costs keep rising, and my retirement funds aren't stretching as far as we'd hoped. If you stayed, Mom added quickly, her voice tinged with embarrassment, and maybe contributed a little more to the household, it would really help us out. The heating bills alone this winter. I looked at their worried faces, the deep wrinkles etched by decades of life's challenges. These were the people who raised me, who supported me through college, through my divorce, through everything. Despite the fact that I'd occasionally dreamed about having my own place again, about coming home to quiet and not having to immediately start preparing medications or dinner, I couldn't say no. How much would help? I asked, already mentally adjusting my budget. The relief on their faces was immediate and heartbreaking. Maybe $2,000 a month, Dad suggested tentatively, for bills, groceries, and the new medications the insurance won't cover. And just like that, I became the primary provider for my elderly parents at 52 years old, adding financial responsibility to my already full plate of caregiving. I kept the rest of my salary in my savings account, watching it grow modestly each month while trying not to think about how my retirement plans were gradually shifting further into the future. I didn't spend much on myself, just the basics and occasional small treats. At my age, I'd learned the difference between wants and needs, and frankly, I was too exhausted from juggling work and caregiving to shop or travel much anyway. My sister, Carol, had a completely different philosophy about money and life in general. She was 7 years older than me at 59, married to her college sweetheart, Brian, and had a 12-year-old son named Michael from a late in life pregnancy that had surprised everyone. They lived in a fancy rented apartment across town and maintained the lifestyle of people with twice their income, a fact that became increasingly problematic as they aged with minimal retirement savings. Oh my God, Janet, are you seriously wearing that blazer again? Carol said during one of her Sunday visits. She was sprawled on our parents' couch, scrolling through her phone while Brian and Dad watched football, and Mom played with Michael. I looked down at my navy blazer, a well-made piece I'd bought 5 years ago that still looked perfectly professional. What's wrong with it? She rolled her eyes dramatically, a gesture that looked increasingly out of place on her 59-year-old face despite the Botox that kept her forehead smooth. I saw you wearing it in your Facebook photo from last Christmas. Don't you ever buy new clothes? You know, Nordstrom has a fantastic sale on their spring collection. I don't need new clothes. These ones work fine, I replied, trying not to let her get under my skin. After decades of her comments, I should have been immune, but somehow they still had the power to make me feel inadequate. This is why you're still single after all these years, she sneered, as if my practical wardrobe was somehow responsible for my divorce and subsequent lack of romantic prospects. No wonder your husband left. No man wants a woman who looks like she's given up on herself. I bit my tongue instead of pointing out that while I had a growing savings account and a stable career, she and Brian were living paycheck to paycheck despite his formerly well-paying executive job. Carol worked part-time at a high-end boutique, mostly to get employee discounts on designer clothes, as she put it, but their combined income disappeared as quickly as it came in. Luxury vacations, expensive restaurants, name brand clothes, and whatever else caught their fancy that week. "Hey Janet," Carol said later that same day, cornering me in the kitchen while I was doing dishes. Her voice had shifted from mocking to sweet, a change I recognized all too well from our childhood. "Can I borrow $500? There's this gorgeous handbag I've been eyeing, and I'm a little short this month. Brian's new position doesn't pay what he used to make, you know." I sighed, my hands deep in soapy water as I scrubbed a pot that Mom could no longer manage with her painful joints. This wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. "Sure," I said, not looking up from the dishes. What was the point of arguing? It was easier to just give her the money than listen to the inevitable guilt trip about family loyalty. "You're the best." She gave me a quick hug from behind, careful not to actually touch the dishwater. "This is why you're my favorite sister." "I'm your only sister," I reminded her, but she was already texting someone, probably telling them she could afford the handbag after all. The money would never be repaid, just like all the other loans over the years. It was the price of keeping peace in the family. When I wasn't at my day job or taking care of my parents, I spent most evenings working on a side project, a home security system app specifically designed for caregivers of elderly people with cognitive issues. It would allow remote monitoring, gentle alerts for the seniors, and emergency notifications that I believe could revolutionize how people cared for aging parents. It integrated existing camera systems but added intelligent alerts that could recognize falls or unusual behavior patterns, along with user-friendly controls that the current market was missing. "Janet, it's almost midnight. Why are you still on that computer?" Mom complained, standing in my doorway in her robe, her white hair sticking up on one side where she'd been sleeping. "You're running up our electricity bill, and you need your rest at your age." "Sorry, Mom. Just finishing something up," I said, not looking away from my screen where complex code filled multiple windows. The irony of her comment about my age wasn't lost on me. "All she does is play those silly computer games," I heard Dad tell Mom as they walked back to their bedroom. "No wonder she can't find a boyfriend. What man wants a woman obsessed with video games at her age?" I didn't bother correcting them. They wouldn't understand what I was working on anyway, and I didn't have the energy to explain. Sometimes it was easier to let people believe what they wanted to believe. After all, I'd been the responsible daughter for so long that no one, not even my parents, really saw me anymore. Just the role I played in their lives. Little did I know that my quiet life of saving money, caring for my parents, and secretly coding was about to be turned upside down in ways I couldn't imagine. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday evening when I returned from work to find our driveway full of cars and the front door propped open with a box. I walked into chaos. The living room was filled with stacked boxes, suitcases, and random furniture. My sister was directing our parents like they were moving company employees, despite Mom's obvious pain as she tried to lift a box with her arthritic hands. "What's going on?" I asked, standing frozen in the doorway as I set down my laptop bag. "Are you moving in?" My stomach knotted with dread at the thought. Brian appeared from the hallway, looking defeated in a way I'd never seen before. His once confident posture was slumped, the gray in his hair more prominent than I remembered, his designer clothes wrinkled and worn. "Brian lost his job," Carol announced before he could speak, her voice sharp with accusation aimed not at her husband but seemingly at the world. "Can you believe how unfairly they treated him? His own friend of 20 years betrayed him." "What happened?" I asked, looking directly at Brian. He couldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at his Italian leather shoes that suddenly seemed out of place among the moving boxes. "It's complicated. Creative accounting, they called it," Carol explained defensively, using air quotes. "He was just borrowing from one account to cover another. He was going to balance everything eventually. The CFO, who was supposed to be his friend, found out during an audit and went ballistic." "You mean he was taking company money?" I asked carefully, the programmer in me automatically translating euphemisms into concrete terms. The room went silent. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dad's confusion was clear. He was having one of his worst days cognitively. but Mom's face showed she understood exactly what was happening. That's a horrible thing to say. Carol snapped, her carefully maintained face flushing red beneath her makeup. His friend asked for the money back and for Brian to resign, which seems fair considering. I didn't have a choice. Brian finally spoke, his voice hollow. They had evidence. It was either resign or face charges. Real friends don't do that to each other, Carol interrupted, her voice rising. They understand when you're in a tight spot, when you need to maintain appearances. I dropped the subject, seeing that logic wasn't welcome in this conversation. Instead, I watched in stunned silence as my sister commandeered my parents' house like she owned it, ordering everyone around while contributing nothing. I helped Mom sit down in her favorite chair, noting how the stress was making her hands shake more than usual. At dinner, Mom announced that Carol, Brian, and Michael would be staying just until they get back on their feet. I nodded and silently prepared myself for what I knew was coming. A nightmare of epic proportions that would further complicate my already challenging caregiving responsibilities. The nightmare I predicted began almost immediately. My quiet, orderly life crumbled under the chaos of having Carol's family in the house. Brian found a new job within 2 weeks, but, as he complained loudly to anyone who would listen, it paid half of what he made before. At 61, he claimed, it was nearly impossible to find work at his former level after the misunderstanding with his previous employer. Carol kept her part-time job at the boutique, working just enough hours to claim she was contributing without actually helping much with their finances or, more importantly, with our parents' care. This chicken is so dry, Carol complained at dinner one night, pushing her plate away dramatically. Mom, don't you know how to use seasoning? We used to eat at Bellissimo's every Thursday, and their food was amazing. Maybe we should order takeout instead. Instead of defending her cooking or telling Carol to make her own dinner, Mom just nodded apologetically. I'm sorry, dear. My hands aren't what they used to be. I'll try to do better next time. The defeated look on my mother's face, the woman who had once prepared holiday meals for 20 without breaking a sweat, made something twist painfully in my chest. I stabbed at my chicken, which was perfectly fine if a bit simple, and kept my mouth shut. The dynamic in the house had shifted dramatically. Somehow, Carol had become the center of everyone's attention and concern. Her problems were everyone's problems. Her complaints were valid grievances that needed immediate addressing, and I was just there. The ATM machine in the corner who paid the bills, cooked most meals, managed medications, and drove to doctor's appointments. One evening, I was working late on my security app when Carol barged into my room without knocking. I quickly minimized my code window, not wanting to explain yet again that I wasn't playing games. I need to borrow $800, she announced, not even bothering with her usual fake sweetness. She stood there in her designer loungewear, freshly highlighted hair perfectly styled even at home. Michael needs a new iPad for school, and we want to take him to that indoor water park this weekend. He's been so upset since we moved here. Didn't Brian just get paid? I asked, trying to keep the exhaustion out of my voice. It had been a long day at work followed by taking Dad to a memory specialist appointment where we'd received less than encouraging news. We have other expenses, she snapped as if I couldn't possibly understand the complexities of her financial situation. Are you going to help or not? I relented that time, but when she asked again the following week for money to buy Brian a decent suit for work, I finally pushed back. Maybe you should consider working full-time, I suggested at dinner after she asked me for money in front of everyone, clearly thinking I wouldn't say no with an audience. The boutique is hiring a manager. I saw the sign in their window when I drove by yesterday. Carol's face turned crimson. I can't believe how cruel you are. You know I need to be available for Michael after school. He's at a critical age. Mom and Dad are always here, I pointed out, immediately regretting bringing them into this as I saw Mom's nervous expression. They could watch him for a couple of hours. That's not the point, she shouted, throwing her napkin down and storming out of the room. Brian followed after giving me a dirty look, while Michael stared at his plate in uncomfortable silence. Mom shook her head at me. Janet, how could you be so heartless? Your sister is going through a difficult time. You know how hard it is to find work at our age. We're all going through a difficult time, I muttered, looking pointedly at Dad, who was struggling to remember how to use his fork again, but no one was listening. They never did. Carol didn't speak to me for a week after that, which was actually a relief. I used the quiet time to finish my security app. After months of late nights and weekends hunched over my keyboard, sacrificing what little personal time I had, it was finally ready to show to someone. The morning I planned to demonstrate it to my boss, I felt a familiar twinge in my lower back, the result of years spent at a computer combined with helping lift my increasingly unsteady father. I swallowed an anti-inflammatory with my coffee and headed to work anyway. "This is incredible," Janet, my boss, Richard, said as I demonstrated the app's features in his office. His eyes widened as I showed him how it could detect specific movements, distinguish between normal behavior and potential emergencies, and send customized alerts. The user interface is so intuitive, especially for older adults, and these algorithms. "Did you develop all this yourself?" I nodded, trying not to look too proud. "It's been my side project for a while. I designed it originally with my father in mind, but I think it could help a lot of families in similar situations." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me with new respect. At 58, he was one of the few people at the company close to my age, and I'd always appreciated how he valued experience over youth. "Janet, this could completely disrupt the elder care security market. Our company could dominate if we owned this." My heart raced. This was the moment I'd been waiting for: recognition of my work and potentially a way to secure my future. "I'm prepared to offer you $500,000 for full ownership plus a percentage of future sales," he said. "What do you think?" I tried to keep my expression neutral despite the adrenaline rushing through me. $500,000 plus royalties? It was more than I dreamed of, enough to secure my retirement and maybe even afford proper care for my parents. "That sounds fair," I managed to say as if I negotiated six-figure deals every day. We shook hands, and I walked out of his office in a daze. I had just become wealthy overnight, but as I drove home, I made a decision. I wouldn't tell my family. If they knew, the money would disappear into Carol's shopping sprees, Brian's investments, or my parents' enabling of their lifestyle. This was my chance for freedom, for a life of my own after years of putting others first, and I wasn't going to waste it. That evening, I contacted a realtor friend, Elizabeth, who had helped one of my colleagues find a condo. "I need a place of my own," I told her over the phone, speaking quietly from my car in the driveway. "I want to buy a condo close to work, move-in ready. Something that would still allow me to visit my parents regularly, but give me my own space. Can you help?" "Absolutely." Elizabeth's enthusiastic voice came through the speaker. "I have a few places in mind already that would be perfect for someone in your situation. Let's meet tomorrow after you finish work." When I entered the house, I found everyone gathered in the living room, an unusual sight for a weeknight. The TV was off, and even Michael wasn't on his ever-present iPad. They stopped talking as soon as I walked in, their expressions a mix of determination and awkwardness that immediately put me on edge. "Janet, we need to talk to you," Mom said, patting the space beside her on the sofa. Her wedding ring slid loosely on her finger. She'd lost more weight recently, something I'd been meaning to discuss with her doctor. I sat down cautiously, setting my laptop bag on the floor. "What's up?" Dad cleared his throat, that familiar harbinger of difficult conversations. "We've been looking at our expenses, and well, things are getting tight. With 5 adults and a child in the house, the utility bills have gone way up, and groceries. You wouldn't believe how much food a growing boy needs." He glanced fondly at Michael, who barely looked up from picking at a loose thread on the couch. "What your father is trying to say," Mom continued, her arthritic fingers nervously pleating the fabric of her skirt, "is that we were hoping you might be able to contribute a bit more to the household expenses. The $2,000 you've been giving us just isn't covering everything anymore, especially with your father's new medication." I looked around the room. My parents looked embarrassed but hopeful. Carol was examining her manicure, her recently purchased designer watch glinting on her wrist, pretending this wasn't her idea, though I knew it was. Brian, at least, had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Are Carol and Brian contributing anything?" I asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. My parents exchanged glances. "Well, they're in a difficult position right now," Mom said softly. And you're single with no dependents. You can afford to help a little more. You've always been so responsible, Janet. There it was, the familiar refrain that had defined my life. Responsible Janet. Reliable Janet. Janet who never complains, never pushes back, never puts herself first. I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head as I'd learned to do during my divorce when emotions threatened to overwhelm me. How much more were you thinking? Maybe $4,000 a month, Dad suggested, the amount causing my stomach to clench. That was more than double what I was already contributing, a significant portion of my take-home pay even with my senior position. I wanted to laugh, or cry, or scream. Instead, I just nodded, my face a mask of calm that I'd perfected over years of dealing with my family's expectations. Fine. Starting this month. Carol finally looked up, a small smile playing on her lips. She thought she'd won. Little did she know that her victory would be short-lived. 3 days later, I met Elizabeth at a beautiful apartment complex 10 minutes from my office. The two-bedroom unit she showed me was perfect modern, bright, and on the top floor with a small balcony overlooking a courtyard with mature oak trees. The second bedroom could be my home office, and there was enough space in the living area to have my parents over for dinner sometimes. This is exactly what I've been looking for, I told Elizabeth as we stood in the kitchen with its modest but updated appliances. It just came on the market yesterday, she explained. At this price point, it won't last long. I used part of the money I'd received from selling my application to buy it outright, signing the papers that day. The sense of ownership, of finally having something that was truly mine after years of putting others first, was overwhelming. As I held the keys in my hand, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, possibility. While I was secretly furnishing my new condo, I noticed something strange happening at my parents' house. Mom, Dad, and Carol kept exchanging these weird looks during dinner, like they were all in on some secret plan. Brian mostly kept his head down, focusing on his food and occasionally helping Michael cut his meat. Something was definitely up, but I couldn't figure out what. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 days later, I came home from work to find a pile of my belongings stacked in the hallway. My books, clothes, laptop charger, and even the framed photo of me receiving my 20-year service award at work were all dumped unceremoniously in a heap. What the hell? I muttered, dropping my bag and heading straight to my bedroom. Except it wasn't my bedroom anymore. Michael was sitting on my bed, now covered with superhero sheets, playing a video game. The walls that had once held my programming certificates and the few personal photos I displayed now featured posters of cartoon characters and sports teams. My desk, where I'd created my app, was gone, replaced by a child-sized table covered in action figures. Aunt Janet, Michael said, looking up from his game. Look at my new room. Isn't it cool? Mom says I can have friends over now. Before I could answer, Carol appeared in the doorway behind me. Oh, you're home, she said, not sounding surprised at all. What's going on? I asked, my voice deadly calm despite the rage and hurt building inside me. This wasn't just any room. It was the bedroom I'd grown up in, the space that had been my sanctuary through my parents' aging, my divorce, all the challenges of the past decade. We moved Michael into your room, she said with a shrug, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. He needs more space for his toys and schoolwork. The guest room was just too small for a boy his age. And where exactly am I supposed to sleep? I asked, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Mom appeared behind Carol, wringing her hands nervously. Janet, dear, we thought since you're hardly ever home anyway, always at work or on that computer, you wouldn't mind using the sofa in the living room. Just until Carol and Brian get back on their feet. I looked from Mom to Carol, who wasn't even trying to hide her smug satisfaction. So you moved all my things without asking me? We knew you'd make a fuss if we asked, Carol said with a dismissive wave of her hand, and Michael really needed the space. His old room was barely bigger than a closet. Speaking of his old room, why can't I use that? I asked, already knowing the answer, but wanting to hear them say it. Carol and Mom exchanged another of those looks. Well, Mom said hesitantly, we thought Carol could use it as a dressing room. You know how many clothes she has. And there's just no space in her and Brian's room for all of them. I stared at them, momentarily speechless. They had kicked me out of my bedroom, the room I'd had since childhood, the room I was essentially paying for with my $4,000 monthly contribution, to make a dressing room for my sister, the sister who wasn't contributing a dime to the household. I looked at her designer outfit, then at my pile of belongings in the hall, and something inside me snapped. But instead of screaming or crying like they probably expected, I just shrugged. You know what? That's fine, I said calmly, a strange sense of clarity washing over me. I won't be sleeping on the sofa because I'll be sleeping in my own condo. Carol laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Right, your imaginary condo. Give it up, Janet. We all know you don't have your own place. I do, actually, I replied, feeling a surprising sense of power in saying the words aloud for the first time. I bought it last week. I was going to tell you all this weekend, but it seems you've made the decision easier for me. Mom and Carol stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You bought a condo? Mom asked, her voice small. How? With what money? That doesn't matter, I said, turning to head downstairs. What matters is that I'm moving out today. I went down to the living room and called a moving company, booking their first available slot, which happened to be early tomorrow morning. Then I called my boss to request a day off, explaining I had a family emergency. Throughout all of this, my family hovered nearby, their expressions ranging from disbelief to growing concern. Janet, you can't be serious, Dad said, finally joining the conversation after coming in from the garage. For a moment, he seemed more lucid than he had in weeks. I'm completely serious, I replied, ending my call with the movers. They'll be here at 7 a.m. tomorrow to get my things. But we need to talk about this, Mom pleaded, her eyes filling with tears. If you're upset about the room, we can figure something out. Maybe Michael can share with Brian and Carol for a while, or, it's not about the room, I interrupted, surprised at how calm I felt. It's about respect and boundaries and the fact that I pay $4,000 a month to live here, and you still treat me like I'm less important than everyone else in this house. It's about years of being taken for granted, of being seen as nothing more than a checkbook and a caregiver. Carol, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. Wait, you actually bought a condo? With what money? You're just a programmer. I didn't answer her directly. I'm going to pack what's left of my things now, I said, walking past them toward the pile in the hallway. Don't touch anything else that belongs to me. The next morning, the movers arrived at 7 a.m. sharp. I directed them to the pile of belongings in the hallway, which had grown as I had gathered the rest of my stuff from around the house the night before. My family watched in stunned silence as the men carried box after box out to the truck. Where exactly is this condo? Dad finally asked as I was doing a final check to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. He looked smaller somehow, more fragile than I'd ever seen him. Near my office, I said, my voice softer as I addressed him. Despite everything, I couldn't be harsh with my father, who was as much a victim of Carol's manipulation as I was. How much did it cost? Carol demanded, her arms crossed over her chest. And how did you afford it? You've been giving most of your money to Mom and Dad for years. I turned to face my family, who were all standing in the living room, watching me like I was performing some strange ritual they didn't understand. That's not really any of your business. We're your family, Mom said, sounding hurt and confused. Of course it's our business. Family works both ways, Mom, I replied, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. And for a long time, it's only gone one way in this house. What does that mean? Carol asked defensively. It means I'm done being everyone's ATM, I said. I'm done giving money that's never appreciated, never enough, and never used responsibly. I'm done being the only one expected to sacrifice. So you're abandoning us? Mom asked, tears welling in her eyes. What about the bills? The groceries? Your father's medications. What about them? I asked. Carol and Brian are adults with jobs. Let them contribute for a change. We can barely afford our own expenses, Carol protested, her voice rising. We have a child. Then maybe you should reconsider your spending habits, I suggested. Maybe you don't need designer clothes and expensive gadgets while asking me to pay for groceries. Carol's face hardened. You know what? I think you should give us your condo. We need it more than you do. We have a family. What do you have? Nothing. I couldn't help it. I laughed. The absolute audacity was almost impressive. No, Carol. I'm not giving you my condo. I'm not giving you anything anymore. Ma'am, we've loaded everything. One of the movers appeared in the doorway. Are you ready to go? I nodded, picking up my purse. I'm ready. Janet, please. Mom tried one last time, reaching for my hand with her gnarled fingers. Don't leave like this. What about your father's care? You know I can't lift him anymore. The guilt stabbed at me, sharp and familiar. I'll call you in a few days, I said, not making any promises beyond that. We'll figure out a care plan. I'll help arrange services. I looked directly at Carol. But I won't be your live-in nurse or your bank anymore. I followed the moving truck to my new condo, a sense of liberation growing with every mile that separated me from my family's house. For the first time in years, possibly decades, I was putting myself first, and it felt simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. The next few days were a blur of unpacking, arranging furniture, deliveries, and setting up utilities. I kept my phone off most of the time, knowing it would be flooded with messages from my family. When I finally turned it on, I was right. Dozens of missed calls and text messages, ranging from angry to pleading to guilt-tripping. Mom, Janet, please call us. Your father keeps asking where you are. Carol, I can't believe you would be so selfish. After everything we've done for you. Mom, the pharmacy called. Dad's medication is ready, but I can't drive to pick it up. My arthritis is so bad today. Carol, you need to come back and fix this mess you've created. Michael is crying. Brian, your parents need you. Think about someone besides yourself for once. I read each message, feeling a mixture of guilt, anger, and determination. The last one from Brian nearly made me throw my phone across the room. Think about someone besides yourself? That's all I had done for years. After a week of silence and finally settling into my new place, I decided to visit my parents' house. I wanted to have a calm, reasonable conversation about boundaries and expectations. I'd researched some home healthcare options that could help with Dad's care while still allowing me to be involved but not consumed by it. When I pulled into the driveway that Saturday morning, I could see the curtains twitch. They'd been watching for me. I barely made it to the door before it swung open. Mom pulled me into a tight hug, her thin frame feeling even more fragile than I remembered. Thank goodness you came back, she said, relief washing over her face. We've been so worried. Your father's been so confused without your help with his medications. Dad appeared behind her, looking simultaneously happy and disoriented. Janet? Is that you? Where have you been, sweetheart? The genuine confusion in his eyes made my heart ache. I'm not moving back, I said immediately, before they could get the wrong idea. I just came to talk. I handed Mom a paper bag. I picked up Dad's prescription on the way. We understand, Mom said, pulling me inside. We've been doing a lot of thinking too. I doubted that, but I sat down anyway. The house was noticeably messier than when I lived there. A stack of unwashed dishes sat in the sink, and Dad's pill organizer was empty, explaining his increased confusion. Carol and Brian were already seated in the living room, with Michael playing a video game with the sound too loud. Carol quickly motioned for him to turn it down when she saw me. Lucy, Dad began, using my sister's name instead of mine, something that happened more frequently as his dementia progressed. It's Janet, William, Mom corrected gently. Janet, we know we made a mistake, Dad said, focusing with visible effort. Your room is yours again whenever you want it. Michael moved back to his old room, didn't he, Carol? And I didn't make a dressing room, Carol added quickly. I can fit my clothes in our bedroom. I looked at their eager faces. I appreciate that, but I'm happy in my new place. But we miss you, Mom said, her voice breaking slightly. And we need you here. It was the real reason for their sudden change of heart. You need my help and my money, I corrected her gently. No one denied it. The silence that followed was damning. We could work something out, Carol suggested, leaning forward with that persuasive tone she'd perfected since childhood. You could keep your condo, but maybe still help us with expenses. Or we could move into your condo. It must be bigger than our old apartment, and you could have this house again. I almost laughed at her audacity. After everything, she was still trying to get something from me. No, Carol, I'm not giving you my condo or my money. But that's not fair, she exclaimed, her carefully maintained composure cracking. You're so selfish. How did you even afford a condo anyway? You must have been hiding money from us for years. I sold an app I developed, I said simply. The security program I was working on at night. The one you all thought was me playing video games or wasting time. My boss bought it for $500,000 plus royalties. The silence that followed was deafening. $500,000? Brian finally whispered, his eyes wide. Mom looked faint. Why didn't you tell us? Carol demanded, her expression a mixture of shock and calculation that I recognized all too well. Because I knew what would happen, I replied honestly. You would have found reasons why you deserved that money more than me. Just like you're doing now. No one could argue with that. Carol's mouth opened and closed, but for once, she had no ready response. So you're just abandoning us? Mom asked, tears welling up. After everything we've done for you? The guilt trip might have worked before, but now it just made me sad. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said firmly. I've researched some home healthcare services that can help with Dad. I'll pay for 20 hours a week to start, and I'll still visit regularly and help coordinate his care. I handed Mom a folder with the information I'd prepared. They can start next week if we call Monday. They're specialized in dementia care, and they'll help with medications, bathing, and taking him to appointments. Mom took the folder uncertainly. But it won't be the same as having you here. No, it won't, I agreed. But it will be better in many ways. Dad will get professional care, and I'll still be involved but not exhausted. I turned to Carol and Brian. As for the household expenses, I think it's time you contributed your fair share. I've written up a breakdown of the monthly bills. I handed them another piece of paper. If we divide it 3 ways between me, you two, and Mom and Dad's Social Security, it comes to about $1,200 each. I'll continue to pay my portion, but I won't be covering yours anymore. We can't afford that, Carol protested. Then perhaps it's time to look for full-time work, I suggested. Or move to a smaller apartment. Or cancel some subscriptions and stop buying designer clothes. You expect me to work full-time at my age? Carol asked incredulously. I do, I replied simply. I'm older than you, and I've been working full-time for decades while also caring for Mom and Dad. Your age hasn't stopped you from shopping or traveling or going to restaurants. It shouldn't stop you from working either. As I walked out the door, I heard them calling me ungrateful, selfish, heartless. But for the first time, those words didn't hurt. They were just the desperate attempts of people who were losing their grip on something they had taken for granted for far too long. 6 months have passed since then. My relationship with my family has changed dramatically, but not in the way I initially feared. After the initial shock and anger wore off, we reached a new equilibrium. The home healthcare service has been wonderful for Dad. The professional caregivers know how to handle his confusion better than I ever did, and he's actually improved with their consistent care. Mom has adjusted to the new arrangement and even seems to enjoy having the healthcare workers around for company. Carol eventually found a full-time position managing the boutique where she worked part-time. She doesn't love the longer hours, but the increased salary has helped her and Brian stabilize their finances. Brian found a better job too, once he accepted that he needed to adjust his expectations. They've moved to a more affordable apartment and seem to be slowly learning to live within their means. Meanwhile, I'm thriving. My condo feels like the home I never had, peaceful, organized, and most importantly, mine. My career is advancing rapidly now that I have the energy to focus on it, and the royalties from my app are steadily accumulating. I've started taking weekend trips to places I've always wanted to visit, bought some new clothes, though still nothing Carol would approve of, and even began dating a kind engineer I met at a tech conference. I visit my parents twice a week and call daily to check in with them and their caregivers. It's a better relationship now, one based on choice rather than obligation. Mom has even started to see me as an individual again, asking about my work and my life instead of just what I can do for her. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, if I was too harsh, too sudden in my break for independence. But then I remember how they treated me, not as a family member to be respected, but as a resource to be used. And I know that walking away wasn't selfish. It was self preservation. As I sit on my balcony watching the sunset, my phone rings. It's Mom, calling not to ask for money or help, but just to chat about her day. I smile as I answer. This is what family should be: people who care about each other as people, not just for what they can provide. Hi, Mom, I say. How are you feeling today? And for the first time in years, I genuinely want to hear the answer. Epilogue. The following spring, I hosted a small dinner party at my condo. Mom and Dad came, with their caregiver Sarah helping Dad navigate the new environment. Carol and Brian were there too, along with Michael, who had grown 2 inches since I'd moved out. My new friend Robert, the engineer I'd been seeing, rounded out the group. This is lovely, Janet, Mom said, looking around my space with genuine appreciation. You've made it so beautiful. There was no resentment in her voice, just a hint of pride. Dad was having one of his good days. Always knew you were smart, he said, patting my hand. Building computer things. It wasn't exactly accurate, but the sentiment warmed my heart. Carol looked different somehow, less tense, her clothes still stylish but not ostentatiously expensive. The store's doing well, she told me as we served dessert. They're talking about promoting me to regional manager. That's wonderful, I said, and meant it. I'm sorry, she added quietly when the others were distracted. For everything before. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of all that had happened, but from Carol it was significant. I know, I replied. Me too. As I looked around at my family gathered in my home, on my terms, in a relationship I had helped reshape, I realized something important. It's never too late to change the patterns of a lifetime. It's never too late to demand respect. It's never too late to start putting yourself first. At 52, I had finally learned what had eluded me for decades. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. Not just for my sake, but for everyone's. In establishing my independence, I had actually helped my parents get better care, pushed Carol towards self-sufficiency, and created space for genuine affection to grow again. The road hadn't been easy, and there were still difficult days. Dad's condition would only worsen with time. Mom's arthritis wasn't getting better. Carol would always be Carol. But now we face these challenges from a place of honesty and mutual respect rather than resentment and obligation. As everyone prepared to leave that evening, Dad suddenly took my hand. In a moment of lucidity that had become increasingly rare, he looked directly into my eyes. Proud of you, he said clearly. Standing up for yourself. About time. And in that moment, I knew that walking away hadn't been an ending at all. It had been the beginning of something better, for all of us.